He laughed at the veteran's loan request, mocking his dreams. But when armed robbers stormed the bank, it was the same man who risked everything to save them all. And the bank manager realized too late. The hero he dismissed was the one who just saved his life. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Tommy's hands trembled as he pushed open the heavy glass doors of First National Bank. The cool air conditioning hit his face, a stark contrast to the warm summer morning outside. His daughter Ellie's small hand felt warm in his, her presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. She looked up at him with those big brown eyes that reminded him so much of her mother's, full of trust and hope. "Is this where we're going to get money for the shop, Daddy?" Ellie whispered, her voice carrying across the marble floor. Tommy squeezed her hand gently. "That's the plan, sweetheart." He patted the folder tucked under his arm, filled with carefully prepared documents, business projections, and dreams carefully laid out in black and white. The bank lobby was quiet, with only the soft whir of ceiling fans and occasional clicking of computer keyboards breaking the silence. Tommy approached the reception desk, where a young woman directed him toward the loan department. His polished shoes, borrowed from his neighbor for this important meeting, clicked against the floor as they walked. "Mr. Howard will see you now," the receptionist said, gesturing to a glass-walled office. Richard Howard sat behind a large mahogany desk, his expression neutral as Tommy and Ellie entered. He didn't stand or offer to shake hands, instead gesturing to the chairs across from him with a slight wave. "Please, sit." Howard's voice was clipped, professional. His eyes flickered briefly to Ellie before returning to his computer screen. "You're here about a business loan?" Tommy cleared his throat, sitting up straight like he'd done countless times during military briefings. "Yes, sir. I'm looking to open an auto repair shop. I've got 15 years of experience working on military vehicles, and I've been doing private repairs from my home garage for the past 2 years. Howard's fingers tapped against his keyboard. "I see. And your current income?" "I work part-time at Peterson's garage while building my client base," Tommy explained, opening his folder. "I've put together a detailed business plan, including market analysis and projected earnings." He pulled out the carefully prepared documents, sliding them across the desk. Howard barely glanced at the papers. "Your credit score?" Tommy's stomach tightened. "It's not ideal, sir. After my wife passed, there were some medical bills." "Mr. Edwards," Howard cut him off, leaning back in his chair. "Let me save us both some time. Without a strong credit history or substantial collateral, you simply don't meet our criteria for a business loan." Ellie shifted in her seat, her small hand tightening around Tommy's. He could feel her tension, her awareness that something wasn't right. "Sir, if you could just look at my business plan," Tommy persisted, his voice steady despite the disappointment building in his chest. "I've already got a loyal customer base the community needs." "Mr. Edwards." Howard interrupted again, his tone dismissive. "The bank has certain standards. Your military service is commendable, but this is business. We can't make exceptions based on personal circumstances." Tommy felt his jaw tighten. He'd faced enemy fire with less anxiety than he felt in this moment. "I understand business, mister." "Howard, I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for an opportunity to prove." "The answer is no." Howard was already standing, gathering Tommy's untouched documents. "I suggest you try again when your financial situation has improved." He held out the folder, not meeting Tommy's eyes. Ellie's voice broke the tense silence. "He fixes everyone's cars, and they all say he's the best." Howard's expression softened for just a moment as he looked at Ellie, but his professional mask quickly returned. "I'm sure he does, young lady, but that's not how these decisions are made." Tommy stood slowly, taking his folder back. His fingers brushed against the edges where he'd spent hours organizing and reorganizing the papers, making sure everything was perfect. "Thank you for your time," he managed to say, his military training helping him maintain his composure. "Daddy?" Ellie's voice wavered slightly as they walked through the lobby. "It's okay, sweetheart," Tommy assured her, though his own heart felt heavy. The morning sun hit his face as they pushed through the bank's doors, feeling both too bright and not warm enough. In the parking lot, Ellie's sneakers scuffed against the asphalt as she walked beside him. "Does this mean we can't have the shop?" Tommy stopped, kneeling down to her level. The rough surface of the parking lot pressed against his knee through his dress pants. "Listen to me, Ellie. Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan, but that doesn't mean we give up." "But that man didn't even look at your papers," she protested, her lower lip trembling slightly. "He didn't even try to understand." Tommy pulled her into a gentle hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck. Over her shoulder, he could see the bank's imposing facade, its windows reflecting the morning sun like cold, unseeing eyes. "Everything's going to be okay," he whispered, as much to himself as to her. "We'll figure something out. I promise." They walked hand in hand through the parking lot, their shadows stretching out before them. Tommy's dream of his own shop seemed to recede with each step, but he kept his head high, conscious of the small hand in his and the trust it represented. The weight of the rejection sat heavy in his chest, mixing with questions about how he would move forward, how he would make his dream a reality for both himself and his daughter. "Can we get ice cream?" Ellie asked suddenly, her resilient spirit already looking for something positive. Tommy managed a small smile, grateful for her ability to bring light to even the darkest moments. "You know what? I think that's exactly what we need right now." As they reached their old pickup truck, Tommy helped Ellie into her seat, making sure she was safely buckled in. The folder with his business plan sat on the dashboard, its contents untouched and unread by the people who could have made his dream a reality. He stared at it for a moment, wondering if his vision of providing a better life for Ellie would ever be more than just a dream. The macaroni and cheese on Tommy's plate had gone cold, untouched since he'd served it 15 minutes ago. Across the small kitchen table, Ellie pushed her food around with her fork, creating little mountains and valleys in the yellow pasta. The tick of the wall clock seemed impossibly loud in the heavy silence. Tommy watched his daughter, his heart aching. Even at 8 years old, she was so perceptive. She hadn't asked about what happened at the bank, but he could tell she knew something was wrong. "Daddy?" Ellie's voice was small. "Yes, sweetheart?" "The mac and cheese is really good." She took an exaggerated bite, her eyes fixed on him with concern beyond her years. Tommy forced a smile. "Thank you, honey. But we both know your mom made much better mac and cheese than I do. I like yours, too." Ellie reached across the table and placed her small hand on his larger one. "Don't be sad, Daddy. We'll figure it out." The lump in Tommy's throat grew bigger. Here was his little girl, trying to comfort him when it should be the other way around. He squeezed her hand gently and finally took a bite of his dinner. Later that night, after tucking Ellie into bed, Tommy sat at his kitchen table with his business plan spread out before him. The numbers hadn't changed, but maybe there was something he could do differently, something he could say to make them understand. He worked late into the night, refining his presentation. The next morning, Tommy straightened his tie in the rearview mirror of his old pickup truck. He dropped Ellie at school, promising to pick her up with good news. The weight of that promise sat heavy in his stomach as he walked toward the bank's entrance. The morning sun gleamed off the glass doors as he pulled them open. The same security guard from yesterday nodded at him, and Tommy managed a small smile in return. He'd only taken 3 steps into the lobby when everything changed. The first sign was a woman's terrified gasp. Tommy turned to see 2 men in black ski masks burst through the doors, brandishing handguns. His military training kicked in instantly, and time seemed to slow down. "Everyone on the ground!" one of the masked men shouted, his voice muffled behind the mask. People dropped to the floor, whimpers and cries filling the air. Tommy lowered himself slowly, his mind racing through combat scenarios he hadn't accessed in years. The security guard was reaching for his weapon, but one of the robbers had already spotted him. "Don't even think about it." The second robber pointed his gun at the guard. "Slide that weapon over here, nice and slow." Tommy watched as the guard complied, his gun skittering across the marble floor. The first robber was heading toward the tellers, while the second kept his weapon trained on the customers and the guard. Tommy noticed the second robber's stance was unsteady, his grip on the gun amateur. Richard Howard emerged from his office, freezing when he saw the scene before him. The first robber spun toward him. "You, manager, open the vault." As Richard was forced toward the vault, Tommy saw his opportunity. The second robber had turned slightly to watch his partner, his attention divided. Tommy's muscles tensed, muscle memory from years of training taking over. In one fluid motion, Tommy launched himself from the floor. He caught the second robber's gun arm, twisting it behind his back, while simultaneously sweeping his legs out from under him. The gun clattered to the floor as the robber went down hard. The first robber turned at the commotion, but Tommy was already moving. He rolled, grabbing the dropped gun, and came up in a crouch. "Drop it!" His voice carried the full authority of his military years. The robber hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Tommy to close the distance. He tackled the man, driving his shoulder into his midsection. They crashed to the floor, the second gun spinning away. Tommy pinned the robber's arms behind his back, his knee pressed firmly between his shoulder blades. "Somebody grab their weapons!" Tommy called out. The security guard scrambled to collect the guns, while someone else ran to help Tommy restrain the first robber. The second robber lay groaning where Tommy had left him, not attempting to move. The whole incident had lasted less than 2 minutes. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Tommy's hands were shaking now as the adrenaline began to ebb, his heart pounding against his ribs. He kept his position, holding the robber down until police officers flooded through the doors, weapons drawn. "They're secured," Tommy called out, slowly raising one hand while keeping the robber pinned with the other. "I'm a veteran. I helped contain the situation." The police quickly took control, handcuffing both robbers and leading them away. As statements were being taken and paramedics checked on the shaken customers, Tommy noticed Richard Howard standing nearby, his face pale and his usual composed demeanor nowhere to be seen. Their eyes met across the lobby. Richard's expression was a mix of emotions, shock, respect, and something that looked like guilt. He took a step toward Tommy, then another, his expensive shoes clicking on the marble floor. Tommy stood his ground, his pulse still racing from the encounter. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, the hero of the moment, but all he could think about was picking Ellie up from school. What would he tell her about today? That her daddy had stopped bank robbers but still couldn't get a loan to start his shop? Richard stopped in front of him, adjusting his tie in what seemed like a nervous gesture. The bank manager opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, a police officer approached to take Tommy's statement. Tommy stood there, his hands still trembling slightly, surrounded by the aftermath of chaos. Camera flashes from newly arrived news crews lit up the bank's lobby through the glass doors. The same doors he'd walked through just minutes ago, feeling defeated. Now people were calling him a hero, but he didn't feel like one. He'd just done what needed to be done, just like he'd done countless times in the military, just like he tried to do every day for Ellie. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the local news station's studio as Tommy Edwards shifted uncomfortably in the plush interview chair. The bright lights felt hot against his skin, and the microphone clipped to his collar seemed to weigh 100 pounds. This wasn't his element. He'd rather be under a car fixing an engine than talking about himself on television. "So, Mr. Edwards," the reporter, a friendly woman with perfectly styled hair, leaned forward. "Walk us through what happened at First Regional Bank yesterday." Tommy cleared his throat. "I just did what anyone would do in that situation. Those people needed help, and I was there." "But not everyone has military training like you do," the reporter pressed. "Your quick thinking saved lives." Tommy's hands fidgeted in his lap. "My training helped, sure, but honestly, I was just thinking about my daughter Ellie. What if she had been there? What if anyone's child had been there? I couldn't just stand by." Back at home, Ellie sat cross-legged on their worn couch, her eyes glued to the television screen. Her best friend Sarah sat beside her, both girls watching with rapt attention as Tommy's interview played out. "Your dad's famous now," Sarah squealed, bouncing on the cushions. Ellie's chest swelled with pride. "He's always been a hero," she said firmly. "Now everyone else knows it too." On screen, Tommy continued to downplay his actions, but the reporter wouldn't let him off easy. She detailed how he'd disarmed one robber and tackled the other, preventing what could have been a tragic situation. The camera cut to security footage showing Tommy's swift, decisive actions. Across town in his office at First Regional Bank, Richard Howard watched the same interview, his stomach churning with guilt. The man he dismissed so readily just yesterday had saved his life and the lives of his employees. The weight of his poor judgment pressed heavily on his shoulders. Later that afternoon, Richard stood before a hastily assembled press conference outside the bank. Camera flashes popped as he adjusted his tie and stepped up to the microphone. Yesterday's events have shown us that heroism can come from unexpected places, Richard began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Mr. Tommy Edwards demonstrated exceptional courage and selflessness. But more than that, he showed me personally that I was wrong in my initial assessment of his character. The cameras clicked faster as Richard continued. I apologize publicly to Mr. Edwards for my dismissive treatment of his loan application. Our bank prides itself on serving the community, and yesterday, Mr. Edwards served this community in a way that we can never repay. I am personally committing to reviewing his application with fresh eyes. Tommy, watching from the back of the crowd, felt his chest tighten. He hadn't come for this, hadn't expected any kind of recognition or special treatment, but hearing Richard's words, seeing the sincerity in his face, gave him a glimmer of hope he hadn't dared feel since yesterday's rejection. After the press conference, Richard approached Tommy privately. I mean what I said. He spoke quietly, extending his hand. Your application deserves a fair review. No guarantees, but I promise to look at it differently now. Tommy shook his hand firmly. That's all I ask for, Mr. Howard. A fair chance. As the day wound down, Tommy sat with Ellie at their small kitchen table. The remains of their dinner, simple hamburgers and fries, sat forgotten as they talked about the day's events. Dad, I recorded your interview, Ellie exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. Sarah came over to watch it with me. Everyone at school's talking about it. Billy Jenkins said his mom saw you on the morning news and called you a real-life superhero. Tommy couldn't help but smile at his daughter's enthusiasm. I'm no superhero, sweetheart. I just did what needed to be done. But you are, Ellie insisted, leaning forward in her chair. You saved all those people, and now Mr. Howard is going to look at your loan application again. Maybe we'll get to open the repair shop after all. Tommy reached across the table and took her small hand in his. Listen, Ellie, I want you to understand something. What happened at the bank, that was just one moment. The real challenge is still ahead of us. Getting the loan, starting the business, making it work, that's going to take a lot more than just one brave moment. Ellie squeezed his hand. I know, Dad, but you're not giving up, right? No, sweetheart, Tommy said firmly, meeting her earnest gaze. I promise you, I'm going to keep fighting for our future. Whatever it takes, we're going to make this work. Together? Ellie asked, her voice full of hope. Together, Tommy confirmed, pulling her into a tight hug. He could feel her small frame trembling with excitement against his chest, and he silently renewed his determination to make their dreams come true. Tommy sat in the hard plastic chair outside Richard's office, his fingers drumming nervously against his knee. The bank lobby hummed with quiet activity, the clicking of keyboards, the soft murmur of conversations, the whir of the copy machine. Every sound seemed amplified by his anxiety. A week had passed since the robbery, since his moment of unexpected heroism. The newspaper articles had already started to fade from people's minds, but Tommy could still feel the weight of those terrifying moments. He glanced down at his hands, remembering how steady they'd been when it mattered most, even though they shook for hours afterward. Mr. Edwards? Richard's voice broke through his thoughts. Please, come in. Tommy stood, straightening his tie, the only one he owned, borrowed from a neighbor for this meeting. He followed Richard into the office, noting how different the banker's demeanor was now. Gone was the dismissive coldness from their first meeting. Instead, Richard's face showed genuine concern. Please, have a seat, Richard said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. I want you to know I've spent the past week advocating for your loan application. I presented your case to the board personally. Tommy's heart lifted slightly. I appreciate that, sir. Richard shuffled some papers on his desk, his discomfort visible. Tommy, I don't know how to say this, but they said no. Tommy finished quietly. Richard's shoulders slumped. Yes, I'm sorry. I tried to explain about your military background, your technical skills, the fact that you saved lives in this very building. But they. He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. They wouldn't budge. They cited your current lack of steady income and the perceived risk of a new business venture. Tommy sat very still, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The rejection felt like a physical blow, despite having braced himself for it. I understand, he said, though he didn't, not really. The thing is, Richard continued, leaning forward, they're looking at numbers on a page. They're not seeing what I've seen. A man willing to risk his life for strangers. A father working tirelessly to build a better future for his daughter. Tommy thought of Ellie, waiting in the car outside. He'd asked Mrs. Johnson from next door to watch her for a few minutes, knowing this meeting might not go well. Numbers don't tell the whole story, he said softly. No, they don't. Richard stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the street below. The board members, they live in a different world. They've never had to struggle, never had to fight for every opportunity. They see risk where I see potential. Tommy rose from his chair, his movements measured and controlled, despite the storm of emotions inside him. Thank you for trying, Mr. Howard. I mean that. Richard, please, the banker corrected. And don't thank me. I failed you. No. Tommy shook his head. You gave me a fair shot. That's more than I had before. He turned to leave, his hand on the doorknob when Richard spoke again. Tommy, don't give up. There are other ways, other banks, maybe even private investors. Tommy managed a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. I appreciate the encouragement, but I think I need to face reality. Sometimes, dreams are just dreams. He walked through the lobby, past the spot where he'd tackled the robber just a week ago. The security guard nodded at him respectfully, but Tommy barely noticed. His mind was already racing ahead, trying to figure out what to tell Ellie, how to explain that sometimes even heroes couldn't make things work out the way they wanted. Outside, the spring sun felt too bright, almost mocking in its cheerfulness. Tommy walked to his old sedan, where Ellie was sleeping peacefully in the back seat, her small face pressed against the window. Mrs. Johnson waved from where she sat in her car nearby, and Tommy gave her a quick thank you before she drove away. He slid into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine. Instead, he turned to look at his daughter, taking in her peaceful expression, the way her dark hair fell across her face, just like her mother's used to. Hey, sweetheart, he whispered, even though she couldn't hear him. I'm sorry I couldn't make it happen. I'm sorry I'm not the successful father you deserve. His voice cracked slightly. But I want you to know something. I love you more than anything in this world. And no matter what happens, no matter how many times the world tells me no, I'm never going to stop trying to give you the life you deserve. He reached back and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Maybe your old dad isn't cut out for business ownership. Maybe I'm just a mechanic who should stick to working for others. But I promise you this, I'll never stop fighting for us, even when it feels like the whole world is against me. Ellie stirred slightly but didn't wake, and Tommy watched as a small smile crossed her sleeping face, as if she could somehow hear his words in her dreams. The evening sun cast long shadows through the small kitchen window as Tommy and Ellie sat at their worn wooden table. Steam rose from bowls of simple chicken soup, with C, another budget meal, but made with love. Tommy watched as Ellie carefully blew on her spoonful, her face serious with concentration. Is it too hot, sweetheart? Tommy asked, stirring his own soup. Ellie shook her head, her ponytail swaying. No, Daddy. I just don't want to spill any. Like you taught me. Slow and steady. Tommy smiled, recognizing his own words. The quiet moment between them felt precious, a shelter from the storm of worries that constantly buzzed in his mind. Bills were piling up, and the odd jobs barely kept them afloat, but here at this table with his daughter, he found peace. As the weeks passed, Tommy picked up whatever work he could find, mowing lawns, helping with home repairs, even cleaning gutters. His hands grew calloused, but his spirit remained strong. One Saturday morning, while working on their old station wagon, he noticed Ellie watching him intently from her perch on an upturned milk crate. "What's that do?" she asked, pointing to the wrench in his hand. Tommy wiped his brow with his sleeve. "This? It's helping me fix the alternator. Want to learn about it?" Ellie's eyes lit up. "Can I really?" "Come here." Tommy patted the concrete next to him. "First rule of being a mechanic, always keep your tools organized." From that day forward, their garage became more than just a workspace. It transformed into their classroom, their sanctuary. Tommy taught Ellie the basics, starting with simple things like checking the oil and changing windshield wipers. Her small hands proved surprisingly capable, and her mind absorbed everything like a sponge. "Remember to turn it clockwise." Tommy guided her hands one afternoon as they changed a tire. "Righty-tighty, lefty-loosey." Ellie giggled at the rhyme, but followed his instructions perfectly. "Like this, Daddy?" "Exactly right, Princess. You're a natural." Their neighbors began to notice the father-daughter duo working in the garage. Mrs. Johnson from next door brought them cookies one afternoon, watching as Tommy showed Ellie how to check brake fluid levels. "You two make quite the team," she observed warmly. The hours they spent together in the garage became their special time. Tommy shared stories about his first car, a beaten-up Chevy that barely ran. Ellie listened with wide eyes, asking questions and soaking up every detail. When they successfully fixed something, they'd high-five, their faces smudged with grease but beaming with pride. One evening, after a particularly long day of odd jobs, Tommy found Ellie in the garage, carefully organizing their growing collection of tools. She had arranged them by size, just as he'd taught her. "Look, Daddy, I put everything where a 10 belongs," she announced proudly. Tommy's heart swelled. "That's perfect, sweetheart. Want to take a break?" "I could tell you some stories." They settled on their favorite spots, Tommy in his old lawn chair, Ellie on her milk crate. The setting sun painted the garage in warm orange light, and the familiar smell of motor oil and metal surrounded them. "Tell me about when you were in the Army," Ellie requested, hugging her knees to her chest. Tommy leaned back, memories flooding in. "Well, there was this one time in Germany when our tank broke down." He told her about how he and his unit had to repair their vehicle in the freezing rain, how teamwork and determination got them through. Ellie listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed wisdom beyond her years. "Were you scared?" she asked. Tommy considered the question carefully. "Sometimes. But you know what? Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep going anyway." Ellie nodded thoughtfully. "Like how you keep trying to get your shop, even though the bank said no?" Tommy's breath caught in his throat. Sometimes he forgot how perceptive she was. "Yeah, exactly like that." "Daddy?" Ellie's voice was soft but determined. "When will we get our shop?" Tommy reached over and took her small hand in his. "I don't know exactly when, sweetheart, but I promise you, we'll find a way. No matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, we'll make it happen." The sincerity in his voice filled the garage, mixing with the golden evening light and the comfortable silence between them. In that moment, sitting with his daughter among their tools and dreams, Tommy felt a deep sense of purpose. The bank's rejection still stung, but it couldn't touch this bond, this love, this shared hope for the future. "Can I help when we get it?" Ellie asked, her eyes bright with excitement. "Of course you can. You'll be my best mechanic." "Promise?" "Cross my heart," Tommy said, making the gesture that always made her smile. "We'll do it together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset through the garage door, surrounded by their tools and dreams. The world outside might be full of challenges, but here in their garage, father and daughter had built something unshakable, a foundation of love, trust, and shared purpose that no bank could ever reject. The fluorescent lights hummed as Tommy wiped down the last wrench. The repair shop was quiet, empty, except for him. His muscles ached from oil changes and tire rotations, but his business plan lay spread across the workbench pages dog-eared from countless readings. Tommy traced the solid numbers with calloused fingers. Despite doing everything right, the bank's rejection still echoed. He organized tools methodically. "Just like you taught Ellie," he murmured, smiling at his daughter's careful attention to detail. The phone rang at nearly 9. Tommy answered wearily. "Edwards Auto Repair, this is Tommy." "Mr. Edwards?" "Richard Howard, from First National." Tommy's grip tightened, remembering the bank manager's earlier rejection. "What can I do for you?" "Actually, I might do something for you. I mentioned your case to a local businessman. He's interested in helping with a private loan smaller than requested, but favorable terms." Tommy's heart skipped. Why would he do this? "He knows about the robbery," Richard said quietly. "I vouched for you. Sometimes good people deserve second chances. Take the weekend to decide." After hanging up, Tommy sat stunned. The opportunity felt surreal. Part of him wanted to grab it immediately. Another part hesitated. He drove home in a blur, finding Ellie waiting with a car book. "Daddy, you're finally home. Hey, princess." "You should be sleeping." "I wanted to wait. Did something happen? You look different." Tommy sat beside her. "Someone wants to help us start the shop. They're offering to lend money." Ellie's eyes widened. "Really? So we can have our own shop?" "Maybe. I haven't decided." "Why not?" Tommy struggled to explain the complexity, but Ellie interrupted. "Remember what you said about changing tires? Sometimes you need the right tools. Maybe this money is just another tool." Tommy stared at his daughter, amazed by her simple wisdom. "You really believe in me?" Ellie nodded firmly. "More than anyone." Tommy hugged her tight, doubt melting away. She was right. This wasn't about deserving. It was about using available tools to build something better. "Thank you, sweetheart. Does this mean we're having our own shop?" Tommy smiled, certainty growing. "I think it does." Tommy stood in the middle of his newly rented repair shop, a satisfied smile playing across his tired face. The morning sun streamed through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Tools lined the walls in neat rows, each one carefully arranged the night before. The small office space in the corner, though sparse, held his desk and a few chairs. It wasn't much, but it was his. "Finally starting to look like something," he muttered to himself, running his hand along a newly installed workbench. The metal was cool beneath his fingertips, solid and real. After weeks of preparation, the space was slowly transforming into the shop he'd always dreamed of owning. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the building as he walked around, mentally checking off his to-do list. The loan from Richard's contact had been enough to get started, even if it meant being careful with every penny. Tommy had spent countless hours cleaning, organizing, and preparing the space himself to save money. A week later, the weather turned. Heavy rain pounded against the roof of the shop, creating a steady drumming sound that filled the space. Tommy was working on paperwork when he first heard it, a low, ominous creak from somewhere above. He looked up, frowning at the ceiling. Another creak, louder this time, followed by an alarming crack. Tommy's military instincts kicked in instantly. He dove toward the door just as a thunderous crash filled the air. The ceiling gave way, sending chunks of wood, insulation, and water cascading down into the shop. When the dust settled, Tommy stood in the doorway, staring in horror at the destruction before him. A massive hole gaped in the roof, rain pouring through it like a waterfall. Water pooled on the floor, seeping into boxes of supplies and threatening his newly purchased equipment. "No, no, no," he whispered, his voice breaking. He rushed forward, desperately trying to salvage what he could. His hands trembled as he moved tools and supplies away from the water, his clothes quickly becoming soaked. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Tommy called the building inspector, his insurance company, and finally, with great reluctance, Richard. "The structural damage is extensive," he explained into the phone, pacing back and forth outside the shop. "I should have checked more thoroughly before signing the lease. I don't know what to do, Richard." Richard's voice was sympathetic on the other end. "Do you need additional funding?" "I might be able to." "No." Tommy cut him off. Perhaps too quickly. His pride wouldn't let him accept more help. "I appreciate it, but I'll figure something out." I just needed someone to talk to who understands business better than I do." After hanging up, Tommy stood in the rain for a long moment, letting it mix with the tears of frustration that threatened to fall. The shop, his dream, lay in ruins behind him. The costs of repairs would be astronomical, and insurance might not cover everything due to pre-existing structural issues. He spent the next morning clearing debris, his muscles aching from the repetitive motion of lifting and carrying. Broken pieces of his dream littered the floor. Waterlogged boxes, rust-threatened tools, damaged equipment. Each piece he moved felt heavier than the last, weighted down by his own disappointment. "What was I thinking?" he muttered to himself, wiping sweat from his forehead with a grimy hand. "I'm not cut out for this. I'm just a mechanic who thought he could be something more." The sound of footsteps made him turn. There stood Ellie, holding a paper bag in her hands, her eyes wide as she took in the destruction. She had insisted on coming to the shop after school, despite Tommy's attempts to protect her from seeing the damage. "I brought you lunch, Dad," she said softly, stepping carefully around a pile of debris. "Your favorite sandwich from Mrs. Peterson's Deli." Tommy's throat tightened as he watched his daughter navigate through the mess, her face showing concern but not defeat. She looked up at the hole in the roof, then back at her father. "It's like when you helped me build my tree house," she said suddenly. "Remember? The first time we tried, it all fell apart in the storm." Tommy nodded, remembering that day from 2 summers ago. "We had to start over completely, but the second time was better," Ellie continued, setting the lunch bag on a relatively clean surface. "You said sometimes we have to tear things down to build them stronger." The simple wisdom in her words hit Tommy hard. He looked around the shop again, but this time through different eyes. Yes, there was destruction, but there was also possibility. The damaged areas could be rebuilt stronger, better than before. "When are we starting?" Ellie asked, her voice full of that unwavering faith that only children seem capable of maintaining. Tommy walked over to her, pulled her into a tight hug, ignoring the dust and grime on his clothes. "We'll rebuild," he promised, his voice stronger now. "It might take time, but we'll make it better than before." Through the hole in the roof, a ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating father and daughter as they stood among the ruins of their dream. The light caught the determination in Tommy's eyes, and the trust in Ellie's face, a reminder that some things couldn't be destroyed by falling roofs or bad luck. Tommy stood in the wreckage of his shop, his boots crunching on broken tiles and splintered wood. Sunlight poured through the gaping hole in the roof, illuminating swirling dust particles in its beam. He picked up a wrench from the debris, wiping it clean with his sleeve. The tool was scratched, but still usable, unlike most of his equipment that lay buried under the collapse. "What am I going to do?" he whispered to himself, his voice echoing in the empty space. The insurance would only cover a fraction of the damage, and the repairs would cost more than he had left from the loan. Each estimate he'd received felt like another punch to the gut. The sound of tires on gravel caught his attention. Through the grimy front window, he saw Richard's silver sedan pulling up to the shop. Tommy straightened his shoulders, not wanting to appear as defeated as he felt. Richard stepped out of his car, his usual crisp suit replaced by casual weekend wear, a polo shirt, and khakis. He surveyed the damage with widened eyes. "I came as soon as I heard," he said, carefully making his way through the debris-strewn floor. "This is worse than I imagined." "Yeah," Tommy replied, setting down the wrench. "Structural engineer came by yesterday. Said the whole roof needs to be replaced, not just patched. The support beams are rotted through." He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a streak of dust. "I should have checked more carefully before signing the lease." Richard picked up a fallen beam, testing its weight. "We all miss things sometimes, Tommy. Even when we think we've covered all our bases." He let out a heavy sigh. "I know something about that." Tommy looked at him curiously. Richard seemed different today, less like the stern banker, and more like someone who understood struggle. "Look," Richard said, finding a relatively clean spot to lean against the wall. "I've been thinking about what happened when you first came to the bank. how I treated you." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "My father, he was a banker too. Nothing I ever did was good enough for him. I spent my whole career trying to prove myself, and somewhere along the way, I became just like him, rigid, unforgiving." Tommy stopped sorting through the debris, surprised by Richard's openness. "We all make mistakes," he said, echoing Richard's earlier sentiment. "Yes, but some mistakes have bigger consequences than others." Richard walked over to where Tommy stood. "The thing is, Tommy, you remind me of myself when I was younger. Determined, hardworking, willing to risk everything for a dream, but I let fear of failure hold me back. I don't want to see you make the same mistake." Tommy felt his defenses lowering. "I'm not afraid of failure," he said quietly. "I'm afraid of letting Ellie down. She believes in me so much, and right now." He gestured at the devastation around them. "Right now, I feel like I'm proving everyone right who said I couldn't do this." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Take a walk with me," he said, heading toward the front door. "You need some fresh air." They stepped out onto the shop's small porch, where two old chairs sat facing the street. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of nearby flowering trees. "You know what I see when I look at this place?" Richard asked, settling into one of the chairs. "I see potential. Yes, there's damage. Yes, it's a setback. But the foundation is solid, Tommy, just like you." Tommy sat in the other chair, letting out a long breath. "I appreciate that, Richard, but good foundations don't pay for new roofs." "No, they don't," Richard agreed. "But they give us something to build on. When I was younger, I had a chance to start my own investment firm. I had everything lined up: clients, office space, even initial funding. But I let fear take over. I chose the safe path instead. And while I've had a good career, I've always wondered, what if?" He turned to face Tommy. "You've got something special here. Not just the shop, but what it represents. Hope, a fresh start, a father showing his daughter that dreams are worth fighting for. That's worth more than any loan approval or banker's stamp." Tommy felt something shift inside him. Not hope exactly, but perhaps it's beginning. "I just don't know where to start," he admitted. "Everything feels overwhelming right now." "Then let's break it down," Richard said, pulling out a small notepad from his pocket. "One step at a time. We'll figure out what needs to be done first, what can wait, and how to make it all work financially. I might not be able to approve loans anymore, but I still know my way around numbers." As they sat there, the two men began to plan. Richard's banking experience combined with Tommy's practical knowledge created possibilities that neither had seen alone. They talked about alternative financing options, ways to reduce costs, and potential partnerships with other local businesses. The sun was lower in the sky when Richard checked his watch. "I should get going," he said, standing up. "But Tommy, remember something. Success isn't about never falling down. It's about how we get back up. And you've got more people in your corner than you realize." Tommy nodded, feeling the weight on his shoulders lighten just a bit. For the first time since the roof collapsed, he could see beyond the disaster to the possibility of what might come next. The shop might be damaged, but his dream wasn't broken. Just a little bent, maybe, but still standing. "Thank you," Tommy said simply, knowing the words weren't enough but meaning them deeply. Richard smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his usual professional demeanor. "This isn't the end of your story, Tommy. It's just another chapter. Keep pushing through. That's all any of us can do." Tommy wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, leaving a smudge of dirt across his skin. The endless work of rebuilding the shop had become his sole focus over the past few days. From sunrise to sunset, he hauled debris, patched holes, and tried to salvage what he could. His muscles ached, but he couldn't stop. This shop wasn't just his dream anymore, it was his responsibility. Every evening, though, no matter how exhausted he felt, Tommy made sure to be home for dinner with Ellie. These moments were sacred, even if they were shorter than before. Tonight, he sat across from her at their small kitchen table, watching as she carefully cut her chicken into tiny pieces. "How was school today, sweetheart?" Tommy asked, trying to hide the weariness in his voice. "We learned about butterflies," Ellie said, her eyes lighting up. Did you know they start as caterpillars? Tommy smiled, grateful for these simple conversations that reminded him why he was working so hard. Is that right? Before Ellie could elaborate, a knock at the door interrupted their dinner. Tommy's brow furrowed. They rarely had visitors, especially this late. When he opened the door, Richard Howard stood there, looking slightly uncomfortable in his crisp suit. Tommy, I hope I'm not interrupting. We're just having dinner, Tommy said, glancing back at Ellie. Would you like to come in? Richard stepped inside, nodding politely to Ellie. Hello, young lady. Hi, Mr. Howard, Ellie replied quietly, suddenly shy. Tommy led Richard to the living room, leaving Ellie to finish her dinner. The room was modest but clean, with worn furniture that had seen better days. Richard sat on the edge of the couch, his posture stiff. I've been working on something, Richard began, his voice careful. I've been pushing the bank to reconsider your loan application. Tommy's heart skipped a beat, but he kept his face neutral. He'd learned the hard way not to get his hopes up too quickly. I've been talking to other investors in the community, Richard continued. People who were impressed by what you did during the robbery. People who've seen how hard you're working to rebuild after the roof collapse. They're interested in backing you. Tommy sat back in his chair processing this information. The bank still hasn't approved anything? Richard shook his head. Not yet. They're hesitant. But with community support, I think we can change their minds. Several local business owners have offered to vouch for you. The owner of Miller's Auto Parts even mentioned possibly partnering with your shop. The possibility of success hung in the air, like a fragile bubble, and Tommy was afraid to breathe too hard, lest it pop. I appreciate what you're doing, Richard, but you're worried about getting your hopes up, Richard finished for him. I understand. The last rejection was hard on you. Tommy nodded, his throat tight. I can't afford another failure. Not just financially, I can't. He glanced toward the kitchen where Ellie was still eating. I can't let her down again. Richard leaned forward, his usually professional demeanor softening. Tommy, I've seen how you work. I've watched you pick yourself up after every setback. That's exactly why I'm fighting for you. The bank needs to see what I see. A man who won't quit, who has the skills and the determination to succeed. Tommy stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. The weight of possibility pressed against his chest. When will you know? I'm meeting with the board next week, Richard said. I've prepared a comprehensive presentation about your case. With the community backing and the progress you've already made on the shop, I think we have a real chance. Tommy turned back to face Richard. Why are you doing this? After everything that happened, Richard stood up, straightening his jacket. Because I was wrong about you, Tommy. And because sometimes people deserve a second chance, including me. After Richard left, Tommy returned to the kitchen. Ellie had finished her dinner and was drawing on a piece of paper. Her face screwed up in concentration. What are you drawing, sweetheart? Tommy asked, sitting down beside her. It's our shop, she said, pointing to a colorful building with what looked like cars out front. See? That's you fixing a car, and that's me helping you. Tommy's chest tightened as he looked at the simple drawing. In Ellie's vision, everything was perfect. The shop was whole, the sun was shining, and they were working together. Do you think Mr. Howard will help us get our shop fixed? Ellie asked, adding more colors to her drawing. Tommy hesitated, unsure how to answer. He's trying to help, but we'll have to wait and see. Ellie put down her crayon and looked up at him with those wise eyes that sometimes made him forget she was just a little girl. I believe in you, Daddy. Tommy felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, and he pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. In that moment, he realized that no matter what happened with the loan, he had already succeeded where it mattered most. His daughter believed in him, trusted him, loved him. That was worth more than any amount of money the bank could offer. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Tommy's temporary workshop, casting long shadows across the scattered tools and parts. A week had passed since Richard's promise to fight for his loan, and each day felt longer than the last. Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he checked his phone for the 100th time, hoping for news. The small garage he'd been renting wasn't much, but it had kept him busy while he waited. A few regular customers brought their cars in for simple repairs, oil changes, brake jobs, the occasional tune-up. It wasn't the dream shop he'd imagined, but it paid some bills. When his phone finally rang, Tommy's heart skipped a beat. Richard's name flashed across the screen. "Tommy?" Richard's voice was heavy. "I need you to come down to the bank." The drive felt endless. Tommy gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white, trying to prepare himself for whatever news awaited him. He'd been here before, the rejection, the disappointment. But this time felt different. This time, he'd allowed himself to hope. The bank's glass doors felt heavier than usual as he pulled them open. Richard stood in the lobby, his expression grim. Tommy's heart sank before a word was even spoken. "I'm sorry, Tommy," Richard said, leading him to a quiet corner. "I did everything I could. The board, they wouldn't budge. Even with the community support, they said the risk was too high after the roof collapse." Tommy nodded numbly, the words washing over him like ice water. All those months of work, the planning, the saving, the endless hours of overtime, the theft, it all felt meaningless now. There might be other options, Richard continued, but Tommy barely heard him. He mumbled something about needing to pick up Ellie from school and walked out, his feet feeling like lead. The next few days passed in a blur. Tommy went through the motions, getting up, making breakfast for Ellie, dropping her at school, working on cars. But the spark was gone. He stopped talking about the shop, stopped sharing his dreams with Ellie over dinner. Their evening meals became quiet affairs, punctuated only by the clink of silverware against plates. Ellie tried her best to reach him. She'd bring him drawings of their future shop, complete with stick figures of them working side by side. But Tommy could barely look at them without feeling the sharp sting of failure. He'd tuck them away in his drawer, promising to look at them later, but later never came. "Dad," she'd say, tugging at his sleeve while he worked on a customer's car, "can I help, like before?" "Not now, sweetheart," he'd reply, his voice distant. "I need to focus." The light in her eyes would dim a little each time he pushed her away. But Tommy convinced himself it was better this way. Better she learned now that dreams don't always come true, that sometimes life kicks you when you're down and keeps kicking. One evening after another quiet dinner, Tommy retreated to the garage. He sat on his old wooden stool, surrounded by the tools and parts that represented his broken dreams. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal that usually brought him comfort now felt suffocating. He picked up a wrench, its weight familiar in his hand. How many times had he imagined teaching Ellie about different tools, watching her grow into a skilled mechanic if she wanted? Now those dreams felt like cruel jokes. The garage door creaked open, and soft footsteps approached. Tommy didn't need to look up to know it was Ellie. She had his late wife's way of moving, quiet but purposeful. "Daddy?" Her voice was small but clear in the silence of the garage. Tommy couldn't bring himself to look at her. "Yes, sweetie? Why don't we fix cars together, like we always do?" The simple question hit him like a physical blow. Tommy finally looked up at his daughter, standing there in her favorite overalls, the ones with little grease stains that never quite washed out. Her eyes held no judgment, no disappointment, only love, and that unwavering trust that had been there since the day she was born. A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, the first real one in days. In that moment, surrounded by his tools and facing his daughter's innocent wisdom, Tommy remembered what it was all really about. It wasn't about the loan or the perfect shop or proving something to the world. It was about this, sharing his passion with his daughter, teaching her what he knew, being there for her. Tommy wiped the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve, his muscles screaming in protest as he lifted another piece of damaged roofing. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on his back as he worked alone on the precarious structure. His tool belt rattled with each movement, the familiar weight both comforting and exhausting. "You're going to hurt yourself up there," a familiar voice called from below. Tommy looked down to see Richard Howard standing in the parking lot, his usual crisp suit replaced by casual clothes. It was strange seeing the bank manager dressed so informally, almost as strange as seeing genuine concern on his face. "Not much choice," Tommy called back, carefully making his way down the ladder. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud, and he couldn't help but wince at the pain shooting through his shoulders. "Can't afford to hire help right now." Richard nodded, his eyes scanning the damaged roof. "That's actually why I'm here. I've been doing some thinking since the bank's decision." Tommy's jaw tightened at the mention of the rejection, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Look, Richard, I appreciate what you tried to do, but this isn't about the bank," Richard interrupted, pulling out a folder from his messenger bag. "I've been talking to some people, local business owners, community leaders, people who remember what it was like to start from nothing." Tommy's curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a rag from his back pocket and wiped his hands, following Richard to a small folding table he used for paperwork. "What kind of people?" Tommy asked, accepting the bottle of water Richard offered him. "People like Marcus Chen, who owns the hardware store downtown, Sarah Williams from the diner, even old Joe Peterson, who built half the buildings in this town." Richard spread several documents across the table. "They're part of a local business coalition. They pool resources to help promising ventures get off the ground." Tommy scanned the papers, his eyes widening at the numbers. "This is different from a regular loan. Because it's not a loan, not exactly," Richard explained, pointing to specific sections. "It's more like a partnership. These investors take a small percentage of profits for the first few years, but they also provide mentorship, networking opportunities, even equipment in some cases." Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he read through the proposal. The terms were more flexible than any bank loan, but something didn't sit right. "Why would they take a chance on me when the bank wouldn't?" Richard's expression softened. "Because they see what I finally saw, Tommy. They see a man who served his country, who's raising his daughter alone, who risked his life to save others during that robbery. They see someone who represents the values this community was built on." Tommy sat heavily in his folding chair, overwhelmed by the possibility before him. "I don't know, Richard. Taking money from people in town. If I fail, I'd be letting down my neighbors." "That's exactly why they want to invest in you," Richard said firmly. "You care about more than just the bottom line. These investors, they're not looking for quick profits. They want to see local businesses thrive because it makes our whole community stronger." Tommy thought about Ellie, about how she'd been helping him organize tools lately, her small hands carefully arranging wrenches by size. She deserved more than a father who was too proud to accept help when it was offered. "Would I still maintain control of the business?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. Richard nodded enthusiastically. "Complete control. The investors are silent partners. They offer advice when asked, but all decisions would be yours." Tommy stood up, walking a few steps to look at his damaged shop. The building needed work, but he could see its potential. With proper funding and support, he could transform it into something special. "They're having dinner at Marcus's house tomorrow night. Nothing formal, just a chance to talk." Richard gathered the papers, handing them to Tommy. "Take these home, look them over. Bring any questions you have." As Richard turned to leave, Tommy called out, "Why are you doing this, Richard?" "After everything that happened at the bank." Richard paused, his shoulders tensing slightly. "Because sometimes the system gets it wrong. And when that happens, good people need to find another way to make things right." Later that evening, Tommy sat at his kitchen table. The proposal spread out before him. Ellie sat across from him, her homework forgotten as she watched him read. "What are all those papers, Daddy?" she asked, reaching out to touch one of the documents. Tommy smiled, pushing them toward her. "Remember how we talked about opening the shop? Well, these papers might help us do that." Ellie's eyes lit up. "Really? So we can fix cars together like we talked about?" "Maybe," Tommy said, watching as she pretended to read the complex documents. "Some nice people in town want to help us make it happen." Ellie looked up at him, her expression suddenly serious. "If the shop works, can we move to a bigger house?" "Jenny at school has her own room with pink walls." Tommy felt his heart squeeze. They'd been sharing their small 2-bedroom apartment for so long, He sometimes forgot how much Ellie noticed about their situation. He reached across the table and took her small hand in his. "You know what, sweetheart? If we work hard and don't give up, we can do whatever we set our minds to." He squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe we'll paint your new room any color you want." Ellie beamed at him, and in that moment Tommy knew he had to take this chance. Not just for himself, but for the little girl who believed in him no matter what. The morning sun cast long shadows across the newly repaired shop as Tommy stood in the parking lot, taking in the sight before him. The fresh paint gleamed on the walls, and the new sign, Edwards Auto Repair, hung proudly above the entrance. His heart swelled with a mixture of pride and disbelief. After months of setbacks and struggles, it was finally happening. "Looking good, Mr. Edwards," called out one of the construction workers as they packed up their tools. The roof repair had been completed yesterday, sturdy and reliable now. No more worrying about collapses or structural issues. Tommy nodded, managing a grateful smile. "Thanks for all your hard work." His voice was thick with emotion. Just weeks ago, he'd been up there alone, trying to fix everything by himself. Now, thanks to the community investment group Richard had connected him with, he had been able to hire proper help. Inside, the shop was transforming. The concrete floor had been sealed and painted, and the work bays were clean and organized. New diagnostic equipment sat ready to be installed, and the office area was taking shape with a small desk and computer. Tommy ran his hand along one of the tool chests, brand new, filled with quality equipment he'd only dreamed of owning before. "Quite a difference from when we first looked at this place," Richard said, appearing in the doorway. He wore jeans and a casual shirt, having dropped the formal banker's attire weeks ago when working with Tommy. "Sometimes I still can't believe it's real," Tommy admitted, turning to face his former adversary turned friend. "When you first brought up the idea of community investors, you thought I was crazy," Richard finished with a chuckle. "But sometimes, the best solutions aren't the obvious ones." They walked through the shop together, reviewing the progress. Richard held a clipboard with their business plan, a document they'd spent countless evenings perfecting. The numbers were solid now, backed by real market research and community support. "The first group of pre-booked customers starts next week," Richard said, checking his notes. "Word of mouth is already spreading. People remember what you did at the bank that day, Tommy. They want to support someone who puts others first." Tommy felt his cheeks warm at the mention of the robbery. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," Richard said firmly. "You did what a hero would do. And now the community is giving back." A small bell jingled as the front door opened, and Ellie burst in, her backpack bouncing as she ran. "Daddy, is it ready? Can I see everything?" Tommy caught her in a hug, lifting her off her feet. "Perfect timing, princess. Want the grand tour?" Ellie's eyes widened as she took in the transformed space. She walked carefully through each bay, touching the equipment with reverent fingers. "It's so clean and shiny. And look at this," Tommy said, leading her to a small corner near his office. There was a little workbench, sized just for her, with basic tools arranged neatly on the wall above it. "Your very own space to learn." Ellie's mouth dropped open in surprise. "Really? My own bench?" "Really," Tommy confirmed, watching as she immediately began exploring her tools. "You've been such a great helper, learning about cars with me. I thought you deserved your own spot." Richard watched the scene with a warm smile. "I think you've got yourself a future mechanic there, Tommy." "The best kind of partner," Tommy agreed, ruffling Ellie's hair. As the afternoon wore on, more people stopped by to see the progress. Mrs. Johnson from the diner across the street brought coffee and sandwiches. Mr. Peterson, whose investment had helped secure the new equipment, came to check on things. Each visitor left Tommy feeling more confident about his decision to trust in Richard's alternative plan. The sun was starting to set when the last visitor left. Tommy and Ellie sat on the newly built front porch, sharing the remains of Mrs. Johnson's sandwiches. The sky was painted in brilliant oranges and pinks, casting a warm glow over their new beginning. "Are you happy, Daddy?" Ellie asked, leaning against his shoulder. Tommy wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Very happy, sweetheart." He looked out at the sunset, at the shop that was finally becoming reality. You know, none of this would have happened if you hadn't believed in me, even when things were tough. I'll always believe in you, Ellie said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. The shop behind them stood as a testament to perseverance, to second chances, and to the power of community support. Tommy felt a deep sense of peace settle over him as he held his daughter close, both of them bathed in the golden light of possibility. Tommy stood beside Ellie, in front of their shop, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. The morning sun caught the fresh paint on the sign, Tommy's Auto Repair, making the letters shine like new pennies. The parking lot was already filling up with cars as people from all over town arrived for the grand opening. "Look at all the people, Dad!" Ellie bounced on her toes, her eyes wide with excitement. She wore a brand new blue dress for the occasion, her hair neatly braided. "I see them, sweetheart." Tommy's voice wavered slightly. He hadn't expected such a turnout. Cars kept rolling in, and familiar faces emerged from them. Neighbors, fellow veterans, even some of the construction workers who'd helped repair the roof. Richard's sleek sedan pulled into a spot near the front. He stepped out wearing a warm smile and carrying a small wrapped package. "Wouldn't miss this for the world," he said, approaching them with outstretched arms. Tommy shook his hand firmly. "Richard, I can't thank you enough for everything. No thanks needed. You did this yourself, Tommy. Your determination made it happen." Richard handed the package to Ellie. "This is for the shop." Ellie carefully unwrapped it, revealing a beautiful brass bell. "It's perfect," she exclaimed. "For good luck," Richard explained, "in business and in life." More cars arrived, bringing what seemed like half the town. Mrs. Peterson from the diner brought homemade cookies. Old Mr. Johnson, who'd been fixing cars longer than Tommy had been alive, shuffled over with his cane to offer congratulations and wisdom. Even some of the bank board members showed up, looking slightly sheepish but genuine in their well wishes. Tommy felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. Each handshake, each pat on the back, each word of encouragement reminded him that he wasn't alone anymore. This wasn't just his dream. It had become something bigger, something that brought the community together. "Time for the ribbon cutting," Richard announced, producing a large pair of scissors and a red ribbon that had been strung across the shop's entrance. Tommy's hands trembled slightly as he took the scissors. He looked down at Ellie, who beamed up at him with pure pride. "Want to help me, kiddo?" Together, they gripped the scissors. The crowd counted down. 3, 2, 1. The ribbon fell away to enthusiastic applause. Tommy felt tears pricking at his corners of his eyes, but he didn't try to hide them. These people had seen him at his lowest. They could see him now, overcome with joy. Inside, the shop gleamed. New tools hung in perfect order on pegboards. The hydraulic lifts stood ready for their first cars. The office area, small but efficient, had a desk with 2 chairs, one for Tommy and a smaller one for Ellie. People filtered through, admiring the setup. Tommy overheard snippets of conversation. "So organized? Look at that equipment. Top of the line. This is exactly what the town needed." Mrs. Peterson had set up a table with refreshments, and the atmosphere felt more like a family gathering than a business opening. Tommy watched as Ellie proudly gave tours to anyone who would listen, pointing out features with the confidence of someone who'd spent countless hours learning about cars alongside her father. "She's going to make quite the mechanic someday," Richard observed, coming to stand beside Tommy. "Yeah, she is." Tommy smiled, watching his daughter explain the different types of wrenches to an attentive audience. "She's got a natural talent for it." The morning wore on, filled with conversations, congratulations, and promises of future business. Tommy's first official appointment was already scheduled for tomorrow. Mr. Johnson's old pickup truck needed a timing belt replacement. As the crowd began to thin, Tommy found himself taking mental snapshots of everything. The sun streaming through the clean windows, the smell of fresh paint mixing with coffee and cookies, the sound of laughter and conversation bouncing off the walls. This was more than just a business opening. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both him and Ellie. When the last guests had gone, Tommy and Ellie sat together on the small bench outside the shop. The new sign cast a shadow over them, and the brass bell gleamed in the afternoon light. "We did it, didn't we, Dad?" Ellie leaned against him, tired but happy. "We sure did, sweetheart." Tommy pulled her close. "We sure did." Looking at their reflection in the shop window, Tommy saw not just a father and daughter, but a team. Every setback, every disappointment, every moment of doubt had led to this. The shop wasn't just a business. It was a promise kept, a dream realized, and a future secured. Ellie yawned and snuggled closer. "I can't wait to help you fix cars." "You already do, kiddo. You already do." Tommy kissed the top of her head, grateful for this quiet moment after the excitement of the morning. The bell above the door tinkled softly in the breeze, as if christening their new beginning. Tommy knew there would be challenges ahead. Running a business was never easy, but for now, he allowed himself to simply be present in this moment of pure contentment. "Dad?" Ellie's voice was sleepy but thoughtful. "Yes, sweetheart?" "Mom would be really proud of us, wouldn't she?" Tommy swallowed hard, his heart full. "Yeah, baby, she would be really proud of us." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun play across the shop's front window. The sign above cast its shadow on the ground before them, a constant reminder of how far they'd come and what they'd achieved together. Morning sun streamed through Tommy's auto repair windows. Mike rebuilt a transmission with remarkable skill, while Sarah diagnosed electrical problems in a minivan, her methodical approach impressing Tommy. "I found the short in the wiring harness," Sarah said, rolling out from under the vehicle with a confident smile. Ellie sat doing homework at her corner desk, the shop's unofficial mascot who greeted customers with infectious cheerfulness. "Dad!" Ellie pointed through the window. "Look across the street!" Tommy's heart sank. A large sign read, "Coming soon, Precision Auto Care, grand opening next month." Construction workers bustled around the vacant lot, steel beams reaching skyward. The footprint was twice his shop's size. "Everything okay?" Mike asked, joining Tommy at the window. "Just new competition," Tommy said, keeping his voice steady. Throughout the day, Tommy watched the impossible construction speed. By lunch, sleek modern walls rose corporate money, not another mom-and-pop shop. He researched their website. Over 200 locations nationwide, state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, factory-certified technicians. "You've got that worried look again," Ellie said, recognizing his expression from their loan struggles. Mrs. Peterson mentioned the new shop during her oil change. Half-price services for the first month, and a fancy waiting room with coffee bar. Tommy's wrench slipped. Half-price would devastate his customer base. By closing, a dozen customers had asked about the new shop. Each question stung. "Try not to worry," Mike said. "People know quality work." After employees left, Tommy studied financial reports. They'd been profitable since month 2, but competition could change everything. Thought about Ellie's college fund and their mortgage. Richard entered. Tie loosened. "I saw the sign. Thought you might want to talk. They've got resources we can't match," Tommy said. "What do you have that they don't?" Richard asked. "Not much." "Wrong. You have relationships. Trust. Mrs. Peterson comes here because you explain things. The Hendersons because you arranged payment plans." Tommy looked around. Customer photos, Ellie's homework, the brass bell. "You've built community," Richard continued. "They'll have equipment and corporate backing, but not your story or earned trust. Their prices will be temporary." "We'll need equipment upgrades, better marketing," Tommy said. "Now you're thinking like a businessman." "The community invested in you. We're stakeholders in your success." "Never thought I'd be grateful for getting robbed," Tommy laughed. "Life works out funny. Speaking of which, I might have ideas about financing those upgrades." The morning sun streamed through the freshly cleaned windows of Tommy's auto repair. The rhythmic sound of tools and the hum of machinery filled the air as Tommy watched his small team at work. Mike, his newly hired mechanic, was bent over a Chevy's engine while Jenny handled the paperwork at the front desk. Tommy rubbed his tired eyes, glancing at the clock. It was already 3:30 p.m., time to pick up Ellie from school. He hadn't realized how different running a business would be from just working on cars. There were schedules to manage, inventory to track, and employees to oversee. "Mike, I'm heading out to get Ellie." Tommy called across the shop. "Can you handle the Martinez transmission?" Mike looked up, wiping his hands on a red shop rag. "No problem, boss. I've got it covered." The word boss still felt strange to Tommy. He grabbed his keys and headed for the door, but Jenny stopped him. "Tommy, we need to talk about the parts delivery," she said, holding up a clipboard. "They're delayed again, and Mr. Peterson's getting impatient about his brake job." Tommy's stomach tightened. "Call Anderson's Parts, see if they can help us out. I'll deal with Peterson when I get back." The drive to Ellie's school gave Tommy a moment to breathe. These past few weeks had been a whirlwind of challenges. The new discount auto shop that opened across town was stealing customers with rock-bottom prices. Tommy knew they used cheaper parts, but customers didn't always understand the difference. Ellie was waiting on the school steps, her backpack covered in colorful pins she'd collected. Her face lit up when she saw Tommy's truck. "Dad!" She bounded over, pigtails bouncing. "Can we go to the shop? I finished my math homework during study hall." Tommy smiled, feeling some of his stress melt away. "Sure, sweetheart. But remember, it's a working afternoon, okay?" I know. I can help Jenny with the filing system we made up." At 11 years old, Ellie had become the shop's unofficial assistant manager. She'd created a color-coding system for the paperwork that even Jenny admitted was brilliant. Back at the shop, Tommy found Mike still working on the Martinez car. "How's it coming?" "Almost there," Mike said. "But boss, we need to talk about supplies. That new place, Quick Fix Auto, they're buying up all the local stock. We're having trouble getting what we need." Tommy's jaw clenched. Another headache to deal with. He'd heard Quick Fix was cutting corners, using aftermarket parts that weren't up to his standards. But they were taking business he needed to keep his dream alive. "Dad!" Ellie called from the office. "Mr. Peterson's on the phone again!" Tommy headed to the office, where Ellie held out the phone. She gave him an encouraging thumbs up as he took it. "Mr. Peterson, I understand your frustration," Tommy said, keeping his voice steady. "We're doing everything we can to get your car ready by tomorrow." After finishing the call, Tommy slumped in his chair. Ellie perched on the desk beside him. "You look tired, Dad," she said, her voice soft with concern. "Just a lot to handle, sweetie." Tommy tried to smile. "Running a business is different than fixing cars." "But you're good at it," Ellie insisted. "Remember what you told me? We never give up." Tommy looked at his daughter, remembering all the times her faith had kept him going. "You're right. How about you show me that new filing system of yours?" For the next hour, Ellie explained her color-coded folders, while Tommy made notes about inventory. Jenny popped in occasionally with questions about scheduling, and Mike needed approval for some parts substitutions. The sun was setting when Tommy realized he'd missed dinner time. "Ellie, we should head home. 5 more minutes?" she pleaded. "I'm almost done organizing the warranty cards." Tommy watched her work, her face scrunched in concentration. She reminded him so much of her mother. That same determination, that same ability to find order in chaos. "Mr. Edwards?" Jenny appeared in the doorway. "Quick Fix just put up new signs advertising 20% off all services." Tommy felt his chest tighten. He couldn't match those prices without cutting corners, and that was something he refused to do. "Dad?" Ellie's voice pulled him back. "Remember when you taught me about using the right tools for the job?" Tommy nodded, wondering where she was going with this. "Well, maybe we don't need to be cheaper," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe we just need to show people why we're better." Tommy stared at his daughter, amazed at her insight. She was right. Competing on price wasn't the answer. They needed to focus on quality, on building trust with their customers. "You know what, sweetheart? You might just be the smartest person in this shop," Ellie beamed. "That's because we're a team, Dad." and teams figure things out together. Tommy pulled her into a hug, feeling the stress of the day begin to lift. Yes, running the shop was harder than he'd expected. Yes, there were competitors and supply problems and endless details to manage. But he had something they didn't: a dream built on honesty, hard work, and the unwavering support of his daughter. "Come on, team captain," he said, grabbing their jackets. "Let's go home and make some dinner." As they walked to the truck, Tommy looked back at his shop. The sign he'd hung himself caught the last rays of sunlight. Tommy's Auto Repair, quality you can trust. Despite all the challenges, he felt a surge of pride. They'd come so far from those days of rejection and uncertainty. Ellie slipped her hand into his. "We've got this, Dad." Together, Tommy squeezed her hand, knowing that no matter what obstacles lay ahead, they would face them as they'd faced everything else, side by side. Tommy pulled into the parking lot of Tommy's Auto Repair, his eyes drifting to the new flashy sign across the street. Discount Auto Care, grand opening. The competitor's building gleamed with fresh paint and modern equipment visible through large windows. His stomach tightened as he watched potential customers walking into their shop instead of his. Inside his own shop, the familiar smell of oil and metal greeted him. Jenny looked up from the front desk, her expression worried. "Morning, Tommy. 3 cancellations already. They're offering first-time customer discounts across the street." Tommy nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll be okay. Our work speaks for itself." But the words felt hollow, even to him. He'd worked so hard to get here, and now everything felt uncertain again. Mike was already working under a Honda, classic rock playing softly from an old radio. The sound of tools clanking against concrete echoed through the shop. Tommy grabbed his work shirt from his office, his mind racing with calculations about how long they could sustain these losses. As he walked across the shop floor, the concrete beneath his feet made an odd cracking sound. Tommy froze, then knelt to examine the floor more closely. A thin crack spider-webbed across the surface, barely visible but definitely there. His heart sank as he followed its path toward the main support wall. "Mike," Tommy called out, his voice tight. "Come take a look at this." Mike rolled out from under the car and joined Tommy. Together, they traced the crack's path, finding more fissures branching out in different directions. Tommy's military training had taught him enough about structural integrity to know this wasn't good. He called a building inspector immediately. The news was worse than he'd feared. "The foundation's shifting," the inspector said, pointing to various spots on his detailed report. "You'll need to close down for repairs before it gets worse. I'm giving you 3 days to clear out the vehicles and equipment." Tommy sat heavily in his office chair after the inspector left, staring at the estimate for repairs. The number seemed to mock him. Almost every penny of his savings would be needed to fix this. He thought of Ellie, of the promise he'd made to give her a better life. Now he'd have to tell his employees they couldn't work for several days, maybe longer. Jenny and Mike took the news better than expected. They understood it was necessary, but Tommy could see the worry in their eyes. They had bills to pay too. The next few days were a blur of activity. Tommy worked alongside Mike to carefully move all the equipment to temporary storage. They called customers to explain the delays and reschedule appointments. Each call felt like another opportunity for them to drift to the competition across the street. On the 3rd day, as construction crews began tearing up the concrete to access the foundation, Tommy stood watching with his hands shoved deep in his pockets. The sound of jackhammers filled the air, and dust clouded around the workers. His savings account was nearly empty now, the money he'd been holding back for emergencies flowing away. Like water, the repairs took 5 full days. 5 days of no income. 5 days of watching customers drive past his closed shop to the gleaming competitor across the street. 5 days of lying awake at night, wondering if he'd made the right choice in taking on this dream. When he picked up Ellie from school that afternoon, she immediately sensed something was wrong. She'd grown so perceptive lately, picking up on his moods even when he tried to hide them. "Is the shop okay, Dad?" she asked as they drove home. Tommy gripped the steering wheel tighter. "It's been a tough week, sweetheart, but we're handling it." Back at the shop, Tommy and Ellie sat together on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The construction equipment had finally gone quiet, leaving behind the smell of fresh concrete and the weight of depleted savings. Tommy ran a hand through his hair. Exhaustion etched in every line of his face. "I don't know, Ellie. Sometimes it feels like every time we get ahead, something pulls us back." Ellie leaned against his shoulder, her small hand finding his. "Remember when you taught me about changing oil? You said the most important thing was to never give up, even when the filters stuck really tight." Tommy couldn't help but smile at the memory. "That's right. Well, this is just like a stuck filter, isn't it?" Ellie continued, her voice full of certainty. "You've already done so much, Dad. You built this whole place from nothing. We can handle a cracked floor, too." Tommy looked at his daughter, amazed at her wisdom. She was right. They'd overcome bank rejections, a collapsed roof, and countless other setbacks. This was just another challenge to face together. "When did you get so smart?" he asked, pulling her close. "I learned from you," she said simply, snuggling into his side as they watched the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. The shop would reopen tomorrow. The foundation was fixed, stronger than before. Tommy knew there would be more challenges ahead. The competition wasn't going anywhere, and his savings were gone. But sitting there with Ellie, he felt something else too. The same determination that had carried him through every other obstacle so far. Tommy trudged into work early the next morning, his shoulders heavy with worry. The foundation repairs would drain every penny he'd managed to save. As he reached for his keys, he noticed something unusual. A crowd had gathered in front of his shop. His heart sank. Had something else gone wrong? But as he got closer, he saw familiar faces, wearing warm smiles. Mrs. Peterson, who brought her old Buick in every month for maintenance, stood at the front of the group. Next to her was Bob from the hardware store, and dozens of other regular customers. "What's all this about?" Tommy asked, his voice catching slightly. "Mrs. Peterson stepped forward, holding an envelope. "We heard about the foundation problems, Tommy. The whole neighborhood's been talking about how your shop might have to close for repairs." She handed him the envelope with trembling hands. "We couldn't let that happen. Not after everything you've done for us." Tommy opened the envelope, his eyes widening. Inside was a stack of checks and cash, along with a list of pledges from local businesses. He had to blink hard to keep his emotions in check. "I don't know what to say," he managed, looking at the faces of people he'd helped over the past months, people whose cars he'd fixed, whose problems he'd solved, whose trust he'd earned. Bob cleared his throat. "There's more. My crew at the hardware store, we're volunteering our weekends to help with the repairs. And Miller's Construction is donating materials." A younger woman Tommy recognized as Sarah, whose brake job he'd done at cost when she was struggling, spoke up. "We set up an online fundraiser too. It's already reached half its goal." Tommy stood there, overwhelmed by the generosity surrounding him. These weren't just customers anymore. They were friends, neighbors, part of a community he'd somehow become woven into without even realizing it. Richard appeared from the crowd, a familiar half-smile on his face. "Seems like the community knows a good thing when they see it, Tommy." The local businessman who'd helped Tommy get started stepped forward too. "You've earned this, son." "Every bit of it. The way you treat people, the honest work you do, that matters around here." People began sharing stories. Mrs. Peterson told everyone about how Tommy had stayed late one night to fix her car so she could drive to her grandson's graduation. Bob mentioned the time Tommy had helped his daughter learn basic car maintenance. Others chimed in with their own experiences. Tommy listened, his throat tight with emotion. Each story reminded him why he'd started this journey in the first place. Not just to provide for Ellie, but to make a difference in people's lives. The crowd gradually dispersed, but not before helping Tommy set up for the day. They moved tools, cleaned workspaces, and even organized a schedule for volunteers to help during the renovation period. As the morning wore on, more support arrived. Local restaurants sent food for the workers. A printing company offered to make new signs and flyers. The auto parts supplier Tommy worked with announced they'd extend his credit terms during the repairs. By midday, the shop was buzzing with activity. Volunteers worked alongside Tommy's regular staff, and despite the construction barriers, customers kept coming in. Some brought coffee, others just wanted to check on the progress or offer encouragement. Tommy moved through it all in a daze of gratitude. He thought about all the times he'd felt alone in this venture, the bank rejections, the roof collapse, the competition's arrival. But he wasn't alone. He never had been. Ellie arrived after school, her eyes wide at the transformation taking place. "Dad, look at all these people," she exclaimed, watching as another group of volunteers arrived with supplies. "I see them, sweetheart," Tommy replied, pulling her close. "Looks like we've got quite a family here." The local businessman who'd first believed in Tommy came by later in the afternoon. He found Tommy in his office, organizing the donations and support pledges. "You built more than just a shop here," the businessman said, gesturing to the bustling activity outside. "You built trust. That's worth more than any bank loan." Tommy nodded, understanding now what the man had seen in him all those months ago. It wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about fixing problems, helping people, being part of something bigger than himself. As evening approached, Tommy stood in the doorway of his shop. The day's volunteers had gone home, leaving behind visible progress on the repairs. Tools were cleaned and put away, work orders were organized for tomorrow, and the fundraiser total had exceeded anyone's expectations. Looking out over the shop floor, Tommy felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over him. His dream hadn't just survived, it had grown into something more meaningful than he'd ever imagined. The community's support wasn't just about money, it was about belonging, about faith in each other, about building something lasting together. He made a silent promise to himself and to all the people who'd shown up today. He would continue serving them with the same integrity and dedication that had earned their trust in the first place. This wasn't just his shop anymore, it belonged to all of them, a symbol of what could happen when people believed in each other. Tommy stood with Ellie in front of Tommy's Auto Repair, taking in the bustling scene before them. The morning sun glinted off freshly washed cars in the parking lot, and the familiar sounds of tools and engines filled the air. Inside, his three mechanics were hard at work, their expertise evident in their efficient movements. "Remember when it was just you and me in here, Dad?" Ellie asked, her eyes bright with pride. At 13 now, she had grown alongside the business, watching it transform from a dream into reality. Tommy squeezed her shoulder gently. "Sure do, sweetheart. Those were some tough days, but look at us now." Through the large bay windows, they could see Mark, his senior mechanic, explaining a repair to a customer. The woman nodded, clearly understanding his detailed explanation. Tommy smiled, remembering how important it had been to find employees who shared his values of honesty and clear communication. "Mr. Peterson's coming in later to get his truck serviced," Ellie said, checking the appointment book she now helped manage. "He says nobody else in town treats him as fairly as you do." Tommy's chest swelled with pride. Building trust in the community hadn't been easy, especially after that competitor had tried to undercut his prices. But he'd stuck to his principles: fair prices, honest work, and treating every customer like family. The morning light caught the repaired section of the roof, now seamlessly blending with the rest. That collapse had nearly broken him, but somehow it had made everything stronger. The community's response had shown him that he wasn't alone in this journey. "Hey, Tommy," Richard's familiar voice called out. The bank manager crossed the parking lot, wearing a warm smile. "Thought I'd stop by and see how things are running." "Richard?" Tommy greeted him with a firm handshake. Perfect timing. Ellie just made a fresh pot of coffee. Inside Tommy's office, photos lined the walls. The grand opening day. Ellie's first time using a wrench, the community fundraiser that had saved them during the foundation repairs. Each image told a story of perseverance and growth. "Hard to believe it's been 2 years since you first walked into my office," Richard said, settling into a chair. "You've proven a lot of people wrong, Tommy." Tommy thought back to that first rejection, the sting of disappointment, and the shame he'd felt walking out with Ellie's hand in his. "Including myself," he admitted. "There were times I thought I was crazy for even trying." "But you never gave up," Ellie chimed in, bringing them both coffee. "Even when the roof fell in, or when that other shop opened, or when—" Okay, Tommy laughed. "No need to list all our disasters." Richard smiled knowingly. "Sometimes the biggest victories come from our hardest battles. You've built something special here, Tommy. Not just a successful business, but a place that matters to people. Through the window, Tommy watched as an elderly customer hugged one of his mechanics after getting her car back. Last week, that same mechanic had stayed late to fix a single mother's car so she wouldn't miss work the next day. These were the moments that mattered most. You know what I'm most proud of? Tommy turned to Ellie. How much you've learned through all this. Not just about cars, but about life. About getting back up when you're knocked down. Ellie beamed. I learned from the best. The morning continued in its familiar rhythm. Tommy moved between the bays, checking on repairs, greeting customers, and solving problems. Each interaction reminded him of how far they'd come from those early days of uncertainty. During their lunch break, Tommy and Ellie sat on their favorite spot, the front porch of the shop. They shared sandwiches and watched the world go by, just as they had done countless times before. Remember when we used to sit here and imagine what the shop would look like? Ellie asked, swinging her legs beneath her chair. Tommy nodded, looking out at the full parking lot. Reality turned out even better than we imagined. A young father walked by with his daughter, waving as they passed. Tommy waved back, remembering all the times he'd walked with Ellie, hoping to give her a better life. Now he understood that success wasn't just about the money in the bank or the cars in the shop. It was about the relationships they'd built, the trust they'd earned, and the lessons they'd learned along the way. The afternoon sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Tommy and Ellie remained on the porch, watching as the last customer of the day drove away with a repaired vehicle and a smile. You did it, Dad, Ellie said softly, leaning against his shoulder. Tommy wrapped an arm around her, his heart full. No, sweetheart. We did it. All of us. You, me, Richard, the whole community. And you know what? What? This is just the beginning. As they sat together watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors, Tommy felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been difficult, filled with setbacks and challenges, but every struggle had made them stronger. He'd learned that success wasn't a destination, but a journey, one best traveled with people you love by your side. The shop stood as a testament to perseverance, to the power of community, and to the strength of a father's love for his daughter. Tommy smiled, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Tommy Edwards, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please, don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.